Hello, welcome to our Navigating Turbulent Times webinar. I'm Jenny Thomas, Head of Marketing Communications at IWFM, and this week we're looking at well-being, how people feel and how they function, both on a personal and a social level, and how they evaluate their lives as a whole. That's how the New Economics Foundation defines well-being. And in adulthood, we're told that the three biggest factors for overall well-being are having a job, our partner relationship, and our health, particularly our mental health. That's according to wellbeing expert Nancy Hay. So work really matters, and the workplace really, really matters. It's hard to remember a time before the COVID pandemic, isn't it? But it's worth noting that before then, about 1 in 4 of us experienced a mental health problem at work each year. Post-pandemic, we're learning about an empowered age around health, where health isn't merely the absence of disease or illness, it's feeling healthy, thriving, and having community. And I think that last point is really quite relevant for this profession. Dr. Gray from the International Wellbeing Institute adds that we are in an employee-driven market at the moment in the workplace, and she cites the Great Resignation that we've heard about in the USA as evidence of that, as we all reevaluate our priorities post-pandemic. The Forbes Guide to the Next Normal of Work, just to add to the emphasis for this subject, puts employee wellbeing as the #1 people issue that all businesses should be mandating in 2022. So this topic is not only going to become even more important, but delivering best-in-class solutions will, I think, become a primary concern for workplace teams in organisations of all shapes and sizes going forward. Now, at the end of last year, IWFM and Sodexo partnered on a podcast series in 4 episodes, which explored the emergence, the importance and the significance of workplace wellbeing. In 4 episodes, Chris Moriarty, who I'm delighted joins us today, spoke to a total of 17 experts and practitioners as he explored the subject's emergence as a core workplace consideration. They looked at wellbeing through the lenses of physical space, organisational culture and digital technology, the workplace trinity, if you will. Today's webinar is not an attempt to condense the podcast content into an hour, but really to focus on some of the key insights and consider the opportunity and challenges before today's workplace and facilities practitioners in the wider sector. Now, the podcasts are all available and free to listen via our website, and we hope that today's discussion will pique your interest further and you'll go back and enjoy them for a first or even a second time. But without further ado, I'm joined by 3 guests today, each of them involved in wellbeing matters, some right in the sector itself, some from outside. And I want to explore with them some of the questions that came up in the podcasts that I really took away from it and the ideas that they sparked. Before I get them to introduce themselves, can I just remind you, our listeners, that we'd love your questions. So please post them in the chat and we'll try to take as many as we can as we go through the session. Over to you, Oliver.
I'm muted. That was bound to happen. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Oliver Henry. I am the co-founder of an organisation called Work Life Well. So essentially, I'm a performance coach, a health and wellness specialist, and everything that we do at Work Life Well is about educating, inspiring, and empowering people to find a better work-life balance, but also to help businesses be healthier, happier places to work. So from data and designing strategy all the way through to delivering workshops, training, and specialist-led classes.
Thanks, Oliver. Do you want to go next, Chris?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Chris Moriarty, and as Jenny's mentioned, I hosted the podcast series and spoke to all of our participants. Previously, I was Director of Insight at IWFM. I've been in and around workplace and facilities management for just short of a decade. And you'll see that I've sort of referred to myself as a workplace commentator. And that's my attempt to make it very clear to people that I'm not a workplace practitioner, I'm not a workplace strategist, but I have been observing how all of this sector has been evolving, I guess, over the time that I've been in it and the positions that I've been in. So I spend a lot of my time talking about that and the rest of my time helping organizations in and around this sector tell better stories.
Good afternoon, everybody. Simon Fuller. So I'm a regional account director for Sodexo. I'm delighted to be with you today. And on behalf of Sodexo, delighted to be partnering with RWFM to bring you what have been 4 fantastic podcasts and what I hope we can do justice to today in summarizing and driving a discussion around well-being and the workplace. For me, well-being as a service provider is twofold. How do I work with our clients, our customers, to improve and drive the right culture, and words that you'll hear throughout this webinar, things like strategy. How do we work on strategies to improve well-being in the workplace? But also not forgetting, in my world, the 35,000 plus Sodexo employees in the UK and Ireland, and the broader 400 plus thousand employees worldwide, the well-being of our own teams. We mustn't forget that it's not just about workplace, it's about the service providers as well. So really a passionate subject for me, and looking forward to having the discussions with you all today.
Brilliant. Thank you. Welcome, Simon, and welcome to all of you. I'd like to kick off with a kind of sort of a generic opener, really. We've looked at the evolution of workplace. Oliver, perhaps I can start with you as a real kind of like sort of specialist in this sort of subject area. How do you think the way we've been working about thinking about well-being has evolved?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. A quote that I would always come back to when asked this question is that the preservation of health is easier than the cure of the disease. Now, although that quote dates back to, the 1900s, we're now almost coming full circle and realizing that well-being needs to be a main focus of business and society. It's that reactive versus proactive approach. How can we prevent things from happening as opposed to reacting to them when they do? But for me, essentially, well-being hasn't necessarily changed. The difficulties, the stressors, the challenges that we face have changed, but the fundamentals of what makes us healthy, or what makes a good corporate or personal well-being strategy or program, hasn't necessarily changed. I think the pandemic and COVID has just shone a light on it, and people now realize that it needs to be holistic. Simon mentioned the word strategy. It needs to be strategic, definitely needs to be cultural. And I think that well-being has gone from almost extracurricular, ad hoc, calendar-led events like Mental Health Awareness Day, Stress Awareness Day, to now fundamental cultural business decisions as what can we put in place to sustain and build culture, manage the emergence of a two-tier culture. And I guess as on top of that, well-being thinking has evolved, or I've definitely seen people's opinions change, that well-being doesn't just mean exercise classes and yoga classes, but it's also about communication, emotional intelligence, empathy, leadership, and how all of those things come together under that banner that is well-being, to nurture and sustain healthy, happy places to work. So I think actually, Jenny, you mentioned it at the start, that well-being is a feeling. I think you said there was a quote about it. It's a feeling, and that was a really interesting point. I've got contacts and colleagues and friends that work in huge organizations with loads of well-being activities on offer. They're very active themselves, but they're not that happy. They don't enjoy the company that they work for, and they don't speak highly of the company they work for. And equally, I know people that aren't necessarily what we would define as healthy, and their company doesn't have a huge amount of well-being provision, but they love the company they work for. So I think the thinking around well-being has definitely evolved, and it's become a little bit more cultural and strategic than activity-led. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Oliver. I think that's really, really interesting, isn't it, Chris? And I remember, the editor of our magazine, Martin Reed, writing about well-being a few years ago, and I think he did this kind of search on the word. It's the kind of the way the concept has developed, and I don't think he found it associated with this profession earlier than around 2014. I think that was the kind of tide mark of well-being. But and so in a sense, well-being 10 years or so ago wasn't really associated with running workplaces and facilities, or kind of workplace management in our mindset. But, you know, if you ask any one of our practitioners, as I'm sure they will say, that their work has always been about supporting healthy and productive workplaces underpinned by a workplace experience. So it's really interesting to think about how that's sort of evolving and changing. Now, you spoke to 17 people, Chris, in the course of the last couple of months, including Oliver. What did you pick up about the way that our thinking about wellbeing has evolved?
It's interesting that you kind of touched on it there with the safety, the health aspect of it, because one of the things that came through in a lot of the interviews was this idea that well-being from a corporate point of view had evolved from health and safety, and in certain sectors and us as a profession, there's a very, very strong legacy of health and safety. Now, what I couldn't help but think when we were talking in those terms, and where I think the conversation is moving towards, is that you could, depending on your mindset, you could take a fairly cynical view about why companies cared so much about health and safety. Now, what we will all love to believe is that because we're people and we want to take care of people. And that's I think that's true of the individuals in those circumstances. But at a corporate level, there could be an argument made because we don't want any cases against us, because we don't want to be liable for this. So we've got systems and processes in place that make sure that we can't be liable for this. Now, I get some people would dispute that, but that's the kind of cynical, and it gives you an idea of how my brain thinks, that cynical view. But I wonder as well whether some of that has crept through into the well-being conversation as well. And one of the things that we talked about with David D'Souza, who's at CIPD, and he was talking about the research that they do like an annual study looking at well-being, and obviously it's HR practitioners talking about it. When I read that and when I spoke to David, two of the things that kind of struck me was that there's this increase in provision of stuff. So benefit packages, classes, advice and guidance, all this sort of stuff. And that's great. And that is a good thing. But there was a kind of worryingly low amount of organizations that said that they are looking fundamentally at the nature of the work. And I think it was, I'm sure Sam Fuller said it in episode 1, but one of the interviewees sort of said, there's no point us having all these great programs if our work is burning people out. And all we're doing then is putting plasters over stuff. And you could argue, you could make that same cynical argument that I've made with health and safety, is that we don't want, now that there's such an awareness about mental health, burnout, stress, the WHO have now classified burnout as an actual thing. They've defined it. Well, that kind of says to me at some point someone can make a case here. So, I think well-being is at the start of a journey. It's a very exciting journey. But I do think for it to really, really have the impact we all think, everyone in it thinks it really could have, it's going past some of those surface level interventions and actually saying, should we just make work better? Should we just do good work? And that was a thing I just kept hearing about work. I think Peter Keller mentioned it from the HSE, work design. And that for me, that feels like the next step on this kind of evolutionary kind of plane.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And I think we might say a bit more about that later on. But I just want to ask Simon from a kind of, a sort of a major from Sodexo's perspective, because I think there's no question, I think, that now that a safe and pleasant working environment is regarded as an essential component of a good job. And I think some of this discussion that came out, Chris, you had with David D'Souza, and also with Peter Kelly from the Health and Safety Executive, he's a psychologist there. It was really, really fascinating, because I think we saw the early workplace studies in the 1930s, for anyone who's kind of like studied that historically, where you started to see things about control in your workplace. But actually, I think it's safe to say that it's undisputed now that a kind of safe and pleasant place to be. We've heard from Nancy Hay, who said that work, the kind of trinity of the three things that kind of hold us together, hold our well-being together, and that work is a really important component from that. And now we're learning that a safe and pleasant working environment, so we can kind of be ourselves, to your point, Oliver, really, so we can be our whole selves, is regarded as an essential component of a good job. Actually, it's part of your job. Simon, what are your reflections on the way wellbeing has evolved from the perspective of being at Sodexo and Sodexo's, you know, great sort of involvement in this area?
Sorry, following in Oliver's footsteps on the mute button there, I won't do that again. Really interesting. I think first things first, in our industry, safety has always been paramount. And for the majority of our clients, the safety and well-being of their employees has been paramount. I think what's evolved is the meaning or the perception of the word well-being, because I think Chris is right. I think we all would like to think, you know, health and safety is paramount because we care for each other. But there's also a statistical element there that does drive behaviors. And typically, you know, 10, 15 years ago, you know, as FM suppliers, workplace suppliers, we were talking to procurement, we were talking to finance, we were talking to the real estate teams around delivering services. I've seen this evolve through the years to involve more and more stakeholders, because the importance of the FM services, the workplace delivery, and the well-being of the customers has become more and more prominent. And I remember 10 years ago, I started talking to occupational health advisors within client teams around healthy eating. And that's where I saw it starting to change. It wasn't just about providing food. It was about providing healthy food, nutrition, information behind that nutrition. And I think we're taking it further now. And I think, you know, listening back to the podcast, all of our listeners, I would really encourage you, if you haven't, to listen to them, because they are fascinating insights. And I think it was mentioned both by Julie Ennis, I will say that, from Sodexo, but also Stephen Boyd, referencing employee experience. You know, 10 years ago, well-being didn't relate to employee experience, it related to employee health. And I think that's the differentiator now. We are now talking about the wider experience of the employees within that facility and how that impacts their well-being. And we can see that now through the stakeholders. You know, FM, workplace services, has become a prominent feature at an executive level. Julie mentions it in her podcast. You know, at C-suite, we are consistently being referenced because workplace services are now being seen as a differentiator for employers in retention and attraction of staff. I think historically in the tech industry, they got that pretty quickly because of the competitiveness of that industry. And you can see the workplace spaces that some of the big tech players have created, because they want to create a space that isn't just about health and well-being, but it's about that whole experience. I think that's where I've seen the evolution really come to the fore.
Can I just add to that, Jenny? Because I'm sure we'll dive into it, because it was almost impossible not to talk about the pandemic during every episode of the podcast, because we're talking about health, right? And that there's a health during a global health emergency, and it's something that Oliver touched on as well. But when Simon's saying there about people's awareness of well-being, what that makes me think about as well is the role that the pandemic has had in shifting employee expectation. And I put it to David, you know, why is there been this real big uptick in awareness, and why is it that, as Simon said, that well-being and our role as a community in protecting that well-being or supplementing that well-being, why is it that it's up at the organizational level? And it is really driven by war for talent. All the sort of developments in workplace services of any kind have kind of been driven by talent. Simon's right to point out that, you know, Silicon Valley competing for a finite amount of coders, that was one of the weapons in their arsenal. Now what we're seeing is that across all sectors now. But I think as well that well-being maybe and I think it's on a similar track to sustainability. That was something we talked about in one of the episodes, in that it was for a while a kind of important lane that you had amongst many lanes in your organization. You know, you needed to be able to point to sustainability, and I think in well-being terms we needed to be able to say, oh yes, we've got one of those as well. But I think the expectation now shifting to it's table stakes. I mean, I'm now so conscious of my well-being as an individual because I'm on Instagram every day, and it's driven down your throat about your state of mind and your health and making sure you do your yoga classes and stuff, and you know, whatever our views are on that kind of cultural thing, that's going to start influencing all the decisions we make, and that will include our employer and the work that we do. And you know, we've seen post-pandemic a lot of studies saying, look, I'm going to look at my career differently. Why am I driving myself into the ground? Because the pandemic's given me an opportunity to take stock. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at well-being, not as a project, not as a thing over there, you know, and making ourselves feel better because we get someone like Oliver in to come and do a workshop with our guys, and then we just carry on as normal afterwards. And I'm sure Oliver will tell us that that's not how his sessions work. He, you know, it's lasting change, but there is always a danger that it becomes kind of this kind of almost gimmicky. And I think that was the one thing I started hearing when I was talking to all these experts, that it was moving out of the realms of gimmick and it was becoming fundamental. And I think that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. But it will be challenging for a lot of organizations.
I think that's right, Chris, and I think there's such a lot that's come out of those conversations, and you kind of lead me on to perhaps the next thing I wanted to get into. Really, you said before, and you know, it's become a bit of a cliche, but the pandemic has been an absolute game changer. It's been a game changer for everybody as individuals. It's a collective thing that we've all gone through together. So we've all had to navigate our own personal routes through that, but it's also a game changer, I think, for organizations. And I think we're hearing that, aren't we? We're hearing that there were some organizations and some businesses who were there already. And you know, Oliver, you've been supporting organizations through that all the time. Simon, you described the evolution that Sodexo's gone through from, you know, always being front and center concerned about people's health and safety at work, to extending across through the employee and the use of the customer experience in our organizations. Now, one of the things that the pandemic has really done, and this was kind of my own personal takeaway, I think, from these podcasts rather, which was about the blurring of lines, because responsibility for employee well-being is actually, it's extending to all workplaces, and we are redefining our notion of what the workplace is, aren't we? You know, the workplace is a place where you go to do work, but we're also really interested in you know, trying to redefine the purpose of the kind of the traditional workplace, whether that's our office, whether that's the space that we go to. Now, before we get into that, I'd like to do a quick poll of our audience, because we had some really interesting results ourselves when we surveyed people about their own well-being. But we'd just like to give you a quick poll, which is, generally speaking, we'd like to ask our audience, would you say your overall well-being, that's physical and mental as we've been discussing, has improved or got worse over the last 12 months because of the changed working practices that we've had, or has it had no impact? Could you just do a little answer on that for us? We'd love to see what you say.
The suspense is killing me.
The suspense is killing me.
It's quite a difficult question to answer, isn't it? If you think about it, when your physical and mental well-being is so broad, it might be that your working practice has really improved and you're more productive and efficient, which makes your mental well-being better. But actually, you haven't exercised and you're doing far less steps a day. So it's a tricky one.
Yes, it is. Have we got our scores on the doors, Sheila? Oh, right. Can everybody see that, or can I only see that?
No, I can see.
We can all see it.
We can all see that. So 28% of us said, well, of our audience, we didn't vote, said it was much better. 22% said it was a little bit better. 14% of you had said it had no impact. That's interesting. A little bit worse, more than 25%. So more than 1 in 4 said it was a little bit worse, and 10% said it was much worse. Now that's interesting, because when we asked, so that's 36% of this audience said their well-being was worse. When we did our national poll of about 1,100 people right across the country, the answer for worse was 25%. So our professionals are tracking a little bit higher than the national average on much worse. Although positively, 50% of you, if my maths is correct, said it was better. So that's really, really encouraging you. And that is actually higher than our national poll, which was just tracking at about 31%, said it was much better. But I think that's really fascinating. But one of the things I really wanted to get to here was we had a really good discussion, I felt, through the podcasts, Chris, or rather you had several really good discussions around the need for community, the need to be together. And if I can just see the next slide, please, Lucy. I was really interested by this kind of comment around culture and around Carolyn Taylor, who's an expert on culture, says, you know, as human beings, we are hardwired to relate to the people who are close to us. And you have to work hard to create communities. So whether if our communities are physical, it's easier, she seemed to be saying, to create community and being together. And we saw that in the earlier quote I had on as well from Dr. Gray, who talked about, you know, she talks more extensively with you, Chris, in her conversation about needing to almost a collective healing after the pandemic. That's kind of how she puts it. But also, I just wanted to juxtapose Carolyn's comments with the comments that we heard from Craig Murray, who was on the podcast, and just also talked about human-centered workplaces and you know, the role for the office. We've kind of been a bit harsh on the role of the office, I think, really, because people initially have really loved working from home, and there's absolutely a place, a role for each workplace setting. But I thought what was really fascinating that came across to me in these conversations was around our need as human beings for community, our need for being together, and the way I think an organisation and the way our employers support us need community and to create togetherness and to create people-centred workplaces to respond to that. Now, Oliver, in this discussion, because you were featured in this episode around culture, you said, and I'll quote you if you don't mind, the workplace has been a change accelerator. It's made people value the culture of the organisation they work for. We have had the space in the pandemic to see what we want from life and how we want to be treated. And I think, Chris, you sort of touched on that too. Do you want to unpack that comment for us and that thought for us a little bit, Oliver, here in this session today?
Yeah, with pleasure. I think Chris actually touched on it earlier about how well-being is becoming a little bit more human as opposed to procedural. And I think what COVID, or however you want to define it, whether it's lockdown, isolation, or time, essentially, I think it's just given people space. It's given businesses space as well for reflection, both personally, what you want from the organization that you work for, how you expect to be treated and managed. I think it's given businesses the opportunity to look at what is working, what isn't working, what are the associated risks of having support, not having support. I think, you know, you were talking previously, Chris, about claims. You know, think about musculoskeletal claims that have gone up because of people working on kitchen tables and sofas and beds instead of a properly DSE certified desk. Businesses are looking at who is engaged, who isn't engaged. You know, when previously we were in the office and John Smith was sat at his desk and we could see him, he was there, it was tangible, it was visible. And now if you're not turning up to virtual all-staff meetings or well-being events, it's almost like you don't exist, right? There's no connectivity. And I think that what I meant by people now value the culture of the organization they work for is culture, like well-being, is a feeling. And I think people now feel a little bit more empowered to not necessarily demand well-being services or activities, but I think they most definitely expect them. And if they're not there, or they're not holistic, or they're not targeted, or they're not addressing, you know, we help organizations really clearly understand the difference between people's wants and needs. And if organizations are surveying staff to find these things out, but they're not acting on it, it's just, again, another way of making people not really feel valued in their organization. And people, I think anyway, are really reevaluating the business that they work for. I can't remember the exact statistics, so don't quote me on it, but I think it was something like 65% of people in the past 2 years have thought about moving jobs or moving businesses. And I think a big problem, or a big reason for that, is a lack of connectivity and engagement, and how to properly manage. And I think the big difference between a successful wellbeing program and just a wellbeing program is how you can really manage the emergence of that two-tier culture, the working from home, the working in the office. And I think COVID has really given organizations the chance to reevaluate what it is that they're doing around culture, not just wellbeing.
I think that's absolutely right. And, in a couple of the conversations, I mean, Craig Murray was really fascinating to me from TSK, because he talked about, actually, it's a little bit like the point you were making earlier, Chris, about what is good work. He focused on really understanding what makes work special, because we've cracked on, haven't we? We have really carried on working, even though we've had this most seismic change in the way we operate. We've all got on with it. We've continued without our traditional workplaces, but we haven't perhaps quite realised or quite internalised what we've missed out on. What are the things that we've lost in that? What are the face-to-face, the collaborations, the things that you overhear, actually, the kind of cultural signifiers, the cultural things that you don't do. And so, if work is in different settings, if work needs to take place in different media, in different setting, in different ways, how do you think organisations, I'm going to come to you, Chris, and then I'm going to come to Simon, because I know that Sodexo has been really thinking about this and been, has had some project work going on this. How do you how will organisations come together to kind of reimagine their spaces and to develop settings and scenarios, and also, to your points, Oliver, cultures that can support this new way of working, so that we don't have a two-tier kind of workplace? We can actually really take the best of what we've experienced, but also not lose the things that we had before that actually perhaps we'd forgotten about or need to reconnect with.
It's a really tricky one, this topic. I mean, this episode was really fascinating from, we traditionally come at a lot of this from space point of view, but actually just understanding some of the cultural challenges with it. I guess what springs to mind from what we've discussed, and culture in particular, culture was sort of used as the totem for why we need to get back into the office, right? A lot of organizations would point to that, say, what about culture? The challenge with it all, and I'm sure there is stuff out there, but I never saw anything that was really quantifiable, that could really say, this is going to have this impact if we don't do this, and our culture suffers as a consequence. And culture has always been, that's always the challenge that culture has had, because it's kind of it's a difficult thing to articulate, and it's a difficult thing to see, right? You can experience it and point towards it, but it doesn't feel like you can grab it. My young kids watch Paddington, and I don't often quote Paddington Bear cartoons, but one of the kids in that said, oxygen, we can't see oxygen, but we know it's there. And I think culture is sometimes a bit like that. Carolyn, though, the reason we got her on the podcast is she has a really nice way of looking at it, which is culture is the behaviors that we tolerate. And I think everyone can relate to that, because it's one thing to throw up our values on our company wall, but if we don't live and breathe them, then actually it's that experience that we take away. Now, what's happened now with people that are then ripped out of those environments, where we can kind of control the environment, now for right or for wrong, that could be positive or negative, is now that it's not as manageable. It's not as, I think professionals of any type like to be able to manage stuff, like be able to keep it predictable as far as possible. And with people dispersed all over the shop, then that becomes increasingly tricky. I think the other thing with the pandemic and what it's the impact it's had on well-being and generally how we work as well, is it's polarizing, because there's a group of people that can talk about how, and we saw it in the poll, this has been amazing for me, this has been phenomenal for me. And other people going, this has been a disaster for me. And I think that's the challenge that organizations will now face, is that how do we blend that all together? Now, to go to your question about how Craig framed it and how we move forward, people that know my career and where I've been will know that I've got a big vested interest in employee experience and understanding how employee experience is working. And I'll never forget being in a room of FM and workplace managers and talking to them about, are we managing spaces, or are we enabling people to work? And everyone put their hand up and said, we're enabling people to work. Great, that's great news. But then 20 minutes later, when I asked them how many of them had data that showed what work people were doing, how well they were supporting it and what they could do, no one put their hand up. No one put their hand up. So I think as we go into this sort of new frontier, as we framed it here, organizations and the people on this podcast, we're going to have to change the frequency, the quality, the richness of the conversation that we have with employees, somehow translate that into our workplace offer. And I do think now with the power shift, it becomes a workplace offer. This is what we're going to present, and hopefully that supports you. And if it doesn't, and you need to go somewhere else, then all the best. Thanks for your service. But we need to start thinking about that. But the last thing I would say is that how critical this is, and it was in this episode that some of the scariest numbers came through, in that Peter Kelly was talking about some of the data that he got in HSC, and the data that he was quoting was scary, and it was pre-pandemic. And we all know the impact, all the surveys that come out saying this, that, and this and that is, how mental health has been one of the victims of I guess they called it the secret pandemic, didn't they? There was a lot of media attention for it.
Yes, I thought I wouldn't depress everybody with those stats, Chris.
But they are the burning platform we've got. And in a work context, the way we work and how well that's supported, he's talking about stress, and that, we can do some wonderful things with space, and Craig's right, we can build it around people. But if we're not making the work easy, i.e. we're removing productivity barriers, and if culturally we're not hammering people in any way, shape or form, that's where we'll get to a better outcome. That's where we'll start addressing some of those figures that Peter talked about. So for me, it's about building this very fluid, constant two-way conversation with our employees.
Thanks, Chris. So, I think my takeaway from this is that probably things are unlikely to return ever to the way they were before, I think, from this, but they probably will drift back to some semblance of their normal shape. I think we've seen through the research we did at IWFM, and I know you were involved in some of it, that, at the kickoff of the pandemic, everyone absolutely loved working from home. It was really great. And for some people, as you said, it's been really amazing and continued to be so for their well-being. For others, it's been a disaster. And I thought David D'Souza was really eloquent on that, actually. And, some of the things that I hadn't even thought about, that for some people, they absolutely want a complete separation of home and work. They don't want the two things to meet. But we're also seeing that organisations, and this is when I'm going to come to you, Simon, really, because the HR profession and the facilities profession and workplace profession are really starting to lean into this. We've seen the burning platform, the reason why we need to lean in this. And but for even before the pandemic, some service providers, Simon, weren't they, were actually creating roles to do with social value. That's the other really interesting aspect and dimension, I think, for this profession. And to do with well-being, not least at Sodexo, where I believe the first dedicated senior role in your consultancy arm is held by So Young Hwan. And you've already quoted Julie Ennis's comment, which was fascinating. She was able to find a positive from the pandemic, and she framed it as a positive from the pandemic being that this profession, this practice is on the agenda of every C-suite. And if we listen to the kind of the Forbes comment that I made, I wanted to make a point of flagging that Forbes comment at the top of the webinar, because well-being is the number one issue that people are saying should be on the table. So if you pull that to its logical conclusion, this is a massive opportunity, isn't it, for the workplace and facilities profession? It's huge. It's come out of a kind of tragedy. Nobody could say the pandemic was anything but in terms of the positive. And I just wondered whether you could talk to us a little bit, Simon, about that, and really, thinking about the project, the Vital Spaces project, I think it is, that you've been working on, and how that's evolved at Sodexo.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, I'll be delighted to. And I think some really good points that have come out through this section. First and foremost, I think well, we did Harris did a recent survey around work-life tracker. That's revealed that 85% of the population have enjoyed working from home and or want to continue to work from home. So the challenge for us here is, how do we attract them back? And how do we ensure that when they are in that workplace, that their well-being is fulfilled and their experience enhanced? Craig Murray on the screen there did a really good session on episode 2. And again, I'd really encourage you to go and have a listen to what he says. He talks about making the workplace special. And I think that's fundamental in our industry now. We have to make and work with our clients to create workspaces that deliver an experience that is something that employees will look forward to going to. It's got to be a destination. It's got to be something just like they look forward to going to a theatre on a Friday night. They need to look forward to going to the workplace on a Tuesday morning. And it's how we create that space. Jenny, you talked at the beginning around the Trinity, the workplace Trinity: physical space, organizational culture, digital technology, all incredibly important. And Craig touched upon data. We may get time to talk about data in a little bit. If not, go to episode 4, I think it is, to listen to Mark Hill talk about digital transformation. I would make it a quintet, and I'm going with this somewhere here, so bear with me. I think I talked at the very beginning about strategy, so I would front end it with strategy and throw in employee experience as well, and that creates 5 pillars. 5 pillars that will create a workspace, a work environment that I think will drive that employee experience and that employee well-being. What we've done at Sodexo pre-pandemic, and it's been evolving during the pandemic, is create a value proposition in Vital Spaces. I would say it's not a service, it's not an offer, it's a value proposition that we've called Vital Spaces. And there are 5 pillars within Vital Spaces, and I go back to my quintet now. So workplace strategy is the first one. How can we work with our clients, our customers, to develop a strategy with them around how they can create a focused approach to workplace planning? And beneath that, and I haven't got time to go into a massive amount of detail, but I will happily take questions, of course. It's around how we design the physical space. So how do we connect with things like sustainability, user experience, and the likes, but also that whole well-being piece in there in terms of the transformation. The second space, organizational culture, physical space, is around workplace design. This is where the likes of Craig Murray come in with TSK. I think, really important to reach out to those industry experts to understand what that physical space needs to be. And listen, it's not a one size fits all. And this is the beauty of our industry now and how we can evolve. I think it's looking at individual clients and customers to understand, demographic, geography, business type, site type. What Vital Spaces is allowing us to do is to tailor and create bespoke offers, bespoke solutions based on these 5 pillars. The third pillar is management, workplace management, very much around culture. So health and safety culture, the support services, the regulatory and compliance services. And I think just touching upon culture, I think fundamentally, and there was some really good stuff that came out of some of the podcasts, it is about leadership. And I think it's about leading from the top to drive that culture out. And then workplace services is something obviously that we do. That's our bread and butter. That's what we've always done, delivering those services. But this is where the employee experience comes in. This is how we can really elevate the employee experience, not just through delivering physical service, but how we can make things so much simpler. You think about home life and, you ask Alexa to do pretty much anything in your house these days and it does it. We need to think about that in the workplace. Automation, how do we use technology to really make a seamless transition through that workspace and enhance that overall experience for the employee and help their own well-being? What that also does, and I talked at the beginning around our own employees' experience and our own employees' well-being, it allows us to develop our own employees in spaces where perhaps they wouldn't be able to be developed before. So again, the use of technology enhances not only our customers' experience, but our employee experience as well. And then the final one is around workplace technology, tech and analytics, and coming back to what Chris was talking about around data, having the right level of technology in there, but the integration of that technology to really drive out the data that we need to understand how our customers, our clients, our employees are feeling. Really important. So Vital Spaces has been created by Sodexo as a value proposition to focus on those 5 key pillars, working with our supply chain, our supply partners, our self-delivery models, our food offers and the likes, that create that bespoke service offer for that client. And I come back to what Julie said and what we said at the beginning, as an FM industry now, we are at the table, we are around that board table at the very beginning when we're talking about strategy. It's no longer we're going to build a building and then we're going to bring a service provider in to deliver services. It's now we're seen, and we should be seen, as industry experts in supporting our customers and our clients to create a workplace that is going to meet the needs of them as a business, but as importantly, to meet the needs and the well-being of their employees. And that's what Vital Spaces is there to do, Jenny.
Thanks very much, Simon. And that's a sea change, isn't it, over time for the profession and for the industry. That's a difference maker, isn't it, really, in terms of the perception. Now, I'm going to launch another poll. Because we want to give you some insight, actually, Simon. Let's have a look and see what our what are the key factors that our audience think will attract people or them back to the workplace, the traditional workplace in 2022. So we're going to run a little poll, and while our audience is having a think about those, how to respond to that poll, I wanted just to get into an really fascinating example there of what's happening where you are, Simon. But I really wanted to perhaps ask Oliver and Chris, starting with Oliver, what are the best examples of workplace wellbeing best practice that they think they've seen in organisations, and perhaps more importantly, what is it that's made them stand out? Why do they think that they're really important? So perhaps, Oliver, I can turn to you first, and hopefully our audience can answer our poll question and we'll see what they've got to say.
Yeah, it's a really tricky question, because I don't think it's a particular set of activities that is a great demonstration of well-being best practice. I think, and actually, Jenny, we spoke about this the other day, I think it's often when an organization has a really deep understanding of the wants and needs, and Chris has mentioned a few times keeping the channels of communication open, that it's the way that they communicate those activities and what's on offer. And if it's actually appealing to not only what somebody wants from a wellbeing program, but also what they need. Simon mentioned, and rightly so, the involvement of leaders, that the best practice is always when, it's a top-down, bottom-up type of approach, but when the leaders are first the example and the inspiration before they even invite people along to join the culture. Because if it's constantly invite, we're all smart enough to know when a wellbeing activity is there as a tick box, as opposed to, no, actually we care about you and we're involved, we're all in this together, and we're trying to be the example and the inspiration, so please join us. And that for me is all about culture. But I think that in terms of best practice, the organizations that we work with anyway, the companies that are firstly really clear on the value and the purpose of well-being and the need to invest both financially, physically, emotionally, and they're not necessarily outcome driven, they're purpose driven. So they've got the consistency there, the leaders are actively involved, and they live and breathe the values like Chris said earlier, then you're destined to succeed when it comes to implementing well-being. But if it's just a set of activities with no real strategy, they're not clearly communicated properly or appealing to people's individual requirements or needs, then engagement is bound to suffer. What do you think, Chris?
I'm gonna do a little bit of a cop-out answer, because I think it is hard. It's much easier and actually more interesting to talk about where it's done badly, because it's because I think part of that though is that it's so rare that an organisation absolutely nails it. But I think for me, an organisation, kind of echoing some of Oliver's points there, you can describe the type of organisation that's more likely to get this right. And they're going to be the organization that have a good relationship with their employees and also treat them as equals, not as some sort of disposable resource. And I think that's one of the things that has slowly been shifting in the world of work for a while. But I hope that the pandemic has shifted it. And the pandemic has got an opportunity to shift it, because David D'Souza, and if anyone's ever looking for like solid gold sound bites on any sort of medium, then David D'Souza is the guy to go to. But one of the things he talked about was the fact that the pandemic is a shared experience. We've all gone through it. We've all had different experiences of it. So some people have lost loved ones. It's very, he sort of points out that it's very rare you'll find someone who hasn't lost something because of the pandemic. And that's, I guess, an opportunity for all of us to take stock at the same time, whereas before maybe, people were sort of had their heads in different spaces and all the rest of it. So there is an opportunity there. But whilst we're still getting examples, and some of the examples that we had come through, I think one of the two that stick out for me was Joanne Oravec in the data episode, when she was talking about organizations that when their employees join, they put a microchip in them. And that, I couldn't get my head around that. Like she knocked me for six when she told me that, because it sounds like something you write about in the sci-fi movie in the future, but she says it's happening. And it was like a really innocuous organization. It wasn't people working for Elon Musk here, although he's trying to put things in our brains and stuff. So I think while organizations are doing that sort of thing, there's a really interesting conversation to be had about boundaries. But I think that probably the more relatable example of that was Peter Kelly, when he told me about an experiment he did with an organization where he got the leader, and this comes back to Oliver's point, leadership. He got the leader. He said, look, give me your email. I'm going to send an email to the entire workforce at 7:00 at night, and we're going to see what happens. And they were getting emails through, and the latest email reply was at 3:00 in the morning, right? And this guy, he spoke to this guy, he was at a nightclub. He'd been drinking all night, right? But because he had his work phone on, or whether or not, I mean, some organizations get you to use your personal phone as your work phone. So, again, blurred boundaries there. And he got this guy and he said, look, you're not in trouble, but I'd love to know why you thought it was appropriate to email at 3:00 in the morning on a staff round robin email. And he said, because I checked my phone, which is problem number one. And problem number two is that he saw his line manager reply 30 minutes before. So he's like, well, I better do something as well. So, we talked about culture, we've talked about leadership, we've talked about tech and the blurring of lines. The pandemic has done a lot to blur it. So I think it's never been more important to get this right, because it's a slippery slope. It's a slippery slope that we're in at the moment. And I think it could go one of two ways. And I hope it's the positive, but I think there will be some organizations that find themselves on a sticky wicket with some of this stuff.
Exactly. And I think before we go to our poll answers, because I'm really interested to see what people have said here, I think just to kind of round that off, it seems to me that the opportunity, because I'm going to frame it like that, and the thing that organizations need to do is actually to try to create employee or worker experiences that are productive, because we all need to be productive at work. Our organizations need us to be productive at work, but not at the cost of our well-being. And it's trying to find the balance between that. And to your points, Oliver, and your observations, our cultures and yours, Chris, can absolutely play a part in that. I'm forever, and I know my colleagues will roll their eyes when I say this, quoting Marcus Child, who always says, and it really stayed with me, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's a very kind of, you go, what, when you hear that? But actually, if you unpick that sentence, it's really profound. And it means that, no matter what you say, if what you do is different than that, then you've got a divergence, and that's a problem. And this is all about trying to bring employee experience to see that as the role of wellbeing related to that, and to really just underpin the opportunity. Now, I'm conscious of time. We haven't had a million questions in from people, so if anybody's got a burning question they want to ask, please type it in now. I'm going to look at the poll results, and then I'd just like to touch a little bit on, because you went to it, Chris, just in the last few minutes, around awareness and connectivity, because you've all referenced it. There was a whole episode on it which went from putting GPS sensors on our dogs to wearing a heart rate monitor when we get when we get into the office, and I was fascinated by it. But can we just see the scores on the doors, Shields, for our survey? Oh, now look at that. Can you all see that panel? So the number one reason people will be attracted back to their former workplaces in 2022, more than half of you said places to collaborate and connect, and that's really fundamental, isn't it? And we've heard that time and time again. I think we've reiterated it here today, but it shone through to me in a lot of the commentary that people had on the podcast. A dedicated working setup, 0%. Well, I suppose you'd expect that from workplace and facilities managers, because they, if anybody, I guess, will be the people who will make sure that the setup they've got is bang on. So that's probably a big tick there. Breakout spaces, that's an interesting one. Only 4% thought breakout spaces would get them back. So maybe we've learned online to do some online collaboration, to do breakout work. Quiet places to focus, only 7%. I'm kind of not surprised about that, maybe. A better IT setup, no, they've all got good stuff at home or wherever they're working. Good air quality. Now, I'm surprised about that, actually. I thought that would come higher than 2%. I thought that would be a real area of focus. That has been a surprise to me. Maybe the practitioners on the call are confident in the air quality in the places that they support. So maybe that's actually a vote of confidence for people in themselves. And a chance to rebuild social networks, 13%. I think that's I think probably what I would have expected to see there. And I think that's interesting. And then healthy food and drink options, no. So either everybody's been listening to Joe Wicks every day cooking his healthy options for us all to be supporting our well-being, or we think we've got different more flexibility around that. So I think that's quite interesting. Any observations on that from the panel?
Well, I don't know if you picked up. I scrolled down. There's one more below it.
Sorry, forgive me.
Work-life separation, but which is the second highest kind of answer there. But for me, it kind of touches on all the stuff that we've been looking at here, which is people. I mean, you could, that's what we want. And I was just talking to a collaborator of mine, Ian Ellison, and he's saying that we've kind of lived in this two-dimensional world on our screens for 18 months, and I think that's the thing that people are yearning for. I don't, when I see people talk about collaboration, I kind of see past it and go, I'm not sure they're saying because it's better to collaborate or the work quality will be better. I think it's because I just prefer doing it like this. I just like being around people more than I like looking at screens and wobbly heads. Although Facebook now with the metaverse are trying to find something in between now, which is a terrifying prospect. And work-life balance is obviously talking about those boundaries. But for me, actually, and it's a point I want to come back to, something that Simon said about how do we get people back into the workplace. And I guess that's the question on a lot of leaders' lips. I think the really interesting question is why. And that's been that came out. There was and forgive me, I can't remember who said it. I saw it on Twitter really early doors, which it was an academic. I'm sure it's Kristen, her first name. I forget her surname now. But she, I'll post it on Twitter afterwards. I'll dig it out. But she said we're asking the wrong question. It's got to be why. And what that gets us into is a conversation about work design that we've talked about with our guys. It's about organizations really fundamentally understanding their employees, the work they're trying to do, and coming up to a reasonable offer. Again, I use that word, that says we need this to happen for our business. We'd like you to help us do it because we think you're really great. And here's how we're going to do it. But if something doesn't work, talk to us. It's fine. We can adjust it. We can shape it. And I think if workplaces have made a consistent mistake over the years, and I think we're looking at the discourse online, I think we're in danger of making it again, is that we really like a rigid solution because it's a lot easier than what the reality is, which is really messy. And I think that's the bit, kind of channeling Neil Usher's workplace is always in beta. I think we now need to move to a situation where workplaces are fluid. They can adjust to the situation externally and internally. They can be built around people. And I think that's a really interesting, and a whole other episode, I should imagine. We touched on it with Mark Hill and Julie Ennis at Sodexo, because that puts pressure, positive or negative, it puts pressure on the supply chain of all the different organizations that form part of the solution of workplaces, because fluidity is really difficult to put down in a contract or in a price or in a product, right? And we're going to have to work really hard now, I think, to build that in. But I think the encouraging thing is I do see that I'm seeing models change, and Simon's touched on some of those. So that's the thing for me from that poll: people, boundaries, but everybody's a little bit different, and that's a nightmare.
I'm really conscious of time, but I did just, thank you, Chris, but I did just want to come to, we may have touched on this a little bit. Ger Keynes has asked a question, and they've said, is post-pandemic, is providing quality, clean air to employees now a priority for employers?
I'm going to say yes, but what I would say, and this is my kind of observation of our communities, that we do tend to focus in on stuff like that. We do sort of zero in on that stuff because it's our bread and butter. We know a lot about this stuff. It's, I think David D'Souza said it in the first episode. He said, before it might be I'm a bit hot, a bit cold, and now FMs have been asked, what's our air quality like, and what filters are you using? And that's a pandemic effect. But what I would say is that think about something like air quality as part of a product. The products that we buy every day have features and benefits, and some are more important than others based on the target audience. And I think workplaces are going to have to get like that. There'll be some workforces that don't even care about air quality because of their nature of them or where they work. In the Scandinavia, if they've got an air quality problem, they just open the window, which is a novel idea. There's a lot of, I think that air quality will be important and focused on for obvious reasons. But that's one of a list of things that are going to be important.
Are you seeing that, Simon, as an issue coming up in your world?
It's been an issue as more of a reactive issue to the pandemic, I think, rather than more of a strategic planning. I think, if we're working on workplace strategy or workplace design, it's part of that package. Yeah. I think it's a good question, but I do think, as Chris said, it's been quite reactive because of the pandemic. What I'd say is I think as part of that design and solution, we need to be thinking about how we can not only make sure the environment is as good as it can be, but actually that it is visible as well. So people feel they're in that workplace and they feel actually, yeah, I'm in a safe, healthy environment. And again, we come back to data and analytics and using technology to do that as well. So that's the way forward, certainly.
Thank you. I'm conscious that we're out of time. There was so much more we could have gone to in this conversation, and I had a feeling that we would get into a conversation and before we knew it, we would be at 1 o'clock, and I don't want to keep our wonderful audience any longer than they've scheduled to be here. But can I perhaps just ask them if they do think there's another conversation to be had about this? There's so much to go at. Then perhaps they'd like to tell us what they'd like us to focus on, or if they think there's another conversation to be had around wellbeing. We've done lots of stuff on it already. I'm going to plug our podcasts because there is a lot of really great content. There's also, we didn't even get to this, but there's also a fascinating, but I found terrifying conversation about how bad it is for us to sit down for hours on end. That freaked me out when I listened to it. So actually, if there's one thing I can recommend in the podcasts, it's that you can actually consume that content when you are walking around. So we can all go for a beautiful wellbeing walk and listen to that podcast content. But I can heartily commend it to you all, and it's stuff that you can dip into and dip out of and dip back into again, because there's an awful lot to absorb. But do tell us, everybody, if you think there's another conversation to be had on this subject to delve into some of the further insights from that, then I think we'll be very happy to do that, and we'll be guided by you as to what we should cover. And then before I go, I'd like to just to say, and I think somebody's asked about this, our recording will be available and the podcasts are available to listen to for anybody who wants to go back. We've given you the CPD number for today's event for anybody who'd like to mark that down. And there's the podcasts, iwfm.org.uk/podcast. You can find them on our website. Our Insight Hub for regular listeners will know that's also on our website at /insight. And we also have some other wellbeing content on there as well for you to have a look at, as well as some other subjects, including the rest of our webinar series, Turbulent Times. Thank you so much to all of our excellent panel for helping us to navigate this subject. It's been a real pleasure to listen to the content and to discuss this subject, which is fascinating. We'll be back next week, same time, same place, so please join us. Thanks to the tech team, who today have been Lucy and Sheila, and thank you of course to all of our listeners. We hope you've enjoyed it. One little last thing before you go, which is showing on your screen, there's a 20% off offer on our training courses and qualifications if anybody wants to have a look at that on our website. Today's recording is available on the website, as I've said. Listen to it, share it with a friend, and from all of us at IWFM, thanks again to our excellent panelists, and thanks to you for listening, and have a great week.